Today's session is the second part of a two-part series. If you missed that first session, the recording is going to be posted very soon. And the first session addressed some fundamentals of proficiency-based teaching and learning. So we covered the steps of backward design, formative assessment, and summative assessment. So as I said before, we'll be posting that recording of today's session and the previous session on our professional development website, and Kristen just dropped the link to that in the chat. Feel free to check out that website. We have a lot of our previous webinars posted on there, and we have a lot of exciting content that will be coming out starting in August. We're working on that right now. So if you check back in with that link, with that website, we will be posting our future PD opportunities there. So in the last session, we really laid out a plan for your proficiency voyage. We discussed some of those key pillars of a proficiency-based classroom to help any teacher prepare for their own journey on that pathway to proficiency. Today, we're going to move on to the best part of any trip, which is embarking on the adventure. In this session, we will examine what proficiency-based principles look like in your classroom while you're teaching and working with students. We will look at target language use, interculturality, the use of authentic resources, how to incorporate and teach grammar in context, and how can-do statements can be used effectively with students. By the end of our time together today, you will be able to discuss proficiency-based practices to use in your classroom, and we'll be able to identify some practices that you will implement next school year. Before we take off here, I just want to invite you to participate in the chat or in any other way that is useful to you. So I'm going to be asking some discussion questions as well as trivia questions that are embedded throughout. But with those discussion questions, we would love to see your responses in the chat. But if you'd rather, keep a journal off to the side and write yourself some notes, again, this time is for you and what you need. So please feel free to engage how you would like to engage today. So here's our first trivia question that we're going to start off with. So again, you can put your answer in the chat. The question is, what is our goal for target language use? So in your classroom with your students, what percentage of the time is our goal for target language use? Yeah, so if you got your camera on, you can hold up either the A, B, or C, or you can put it in the chat. I'm seeing some A's. I'm seeing some 90% in the chat. Yes, very good. 90% is the correct answer. It has been almost a decade already since ACFL came out with their position statement on target language use in the classroom. They encourage teachers to try and hit that 90% plus target language use, but that's not just language from the teacher. It's from both the teacher and the students. And there's numerous reasons why ACFL and most people associated with language pedagogy believe in that 90% plus target language environment and how it's beneficial for our students. And I think of my own experiences with language acquisition. I'm sure that all of us have very similar stories as language learners. So I'll share my experience. I had studied French at the university level, but I hadn't really used my French outside of the classroom. So when I arrived to Southern France for my assistant year post-college, I remember meeting the proviseur, which is like the principal of the high school where I was working. And I couldn't understand any of her questions in French. And I remember her turning to one of the English teachers and saying, "Oh, this girl doesn't speak any French," which is going to be great for our English students, I guess. So that experience was a tough pill for me to swallow. But in the next 7 months, living only in French outside of my classroom, my ability in French quickly improved. I'm sure that all of us have immersion experiences similar to this in our language learning journeys. Unfortunately, these immersion experiences are not always available for our students. So it's really our job as teachers to do the best that we can with them in the time that we have. You might only see your students for 45 to 50 minutes every day or 60 to 90 minutes every other day, and then they continue the rest of their lives in English. But striving for that 90% plus target language environment in our language classrooms, we can try to create that immersion-like atmosphere for our students, which will, of course, help them with language acquisition. Another thing to keep in mind is that the more that students are exposed to the language, the more comfortable that they will feel. And it's brain science. So when they're comfortable, that environment doesn't feel as risky, that affective filter goes down, and they're going to get more language into their brains. The more that students hear that language, the more they'll understand and the more confident that they'll feel. Moving on to near exclusive use of the target language with students is a journey, and we're all at different points along the way. Let's stop and take a moment to reflect. Where are you on your target language journey? Is this a growth area for you? Do you have hesitations? How much target language do you use in the classroom? And here's a big question. How has the pandemic impacted your use of target language? I know that that was a huge factor for me. So if you feel like sharing in the chat, where are you on your target language journey? So I'm seeing not 90, but working towards it, getting there slowly. Yes, but trying. And remember, it is a journey. It is a journey. Yes, and I have to say from my experience too, a couple of people have mentioned the pandemic did have a big impact on target language use, especially if you were partially in the classroom, partially online. That had a huge impact. So I'll tell you a little bit about my target language journey. At the beginning of my Spanish teaching career, I spoke a lot of English in my classroom, but the more that I observed other teachers, attended workshops, conferences, teacher boot camps, adjusted my expectations, I was able to transition to 90% target language over a few years. But it definitely does take patience, diligence, and acceptance of that process. But by the time I left the classroom, with the exception of the pandemic, I felt comfortable conducting my Spanish 1, 2, and 3 classes in the target language up to and hopefully exceeding 90% of the time. So think about starting small. What's one thing that you do on a regular basis in English that you could start doing in the target language? Maybe it's taking roll, maybe it's some kind of transition between activity. Could you create some visuals to help you do that one thing in the target language instead of in English? By building routines in the target language, students will start to expect that and they'll get the hang of it. So as you think about target language use in your classroom, keep in mind that every journey starts with a first step. Envision your first interaction with students in the fall. How will you take that first step towards a 90% plus target language learning environment? So in the fall, what can we do? What's a first step? So one solid first step that you could do on day one, first day with your students to set the tone for the year, is to start the class first minute of that first period using only the target language, regardless of the level that you're teaching. I remember trying this out for the first time, my third year of teaching. The French teacher next door to me suggested not to speak any English for the first 10 minutes of my Spanish 1 class. And I thought, there's no way, how can I do that? I have no idea how to even do that. But I decided to try it anyways. So I let my students come in, I introduced myself in Spanish, I helped them introduce themselves in Spanish, and I was surprised it worked. It worked pretty well. Flash forward to a few years later, and I was confidently starting out the year in all levels in Spanish. So even novice low level classes, you can do things in the target language like introduce yourself, take roll, ask some basic questions, give a tour of your classroom, all in the target language, but of course, using supports, using visuals. Remember to smile, be encouraging, positive, speak slowly, rely on your cognates, use visual cues, and repeat, repeat, repeat. Every step you take to create that target language expectation, the more comfortable students will feel and will start to follow along with you. An important point to keep in mind is that we can't just speak Spanish or French and then expect that our students are going to become fluent. We need to make sure that what we are saying is comprehensible for our students. If not, that affective filter is going to go up and that language isn't going to go in. Think about it as developing any other type of skill, like traveling, for example. If you take a student that has never traveled before and threw them into a new country alone and then tell them to figure it out, they probably won't have a great time. But if you take the time beforehand to build some of those skills, like how to navigate an airport, how to read a train schedule, how to use maps on their phone, they will have a much better experience. And yes, students need to make mistakes along the way in order to learn, but we can also coach them to set them up for success. In the same way, we can support our students' understanding of the language in our classroom by focusing on providing input that is comprehensible for our learners. So how can we provide that good input for our students? As teachers, you are the main source of target language input for your students. So that input that you're giving them has got to be understandable, comprehensible for them. First and foremost, any type of visual aid will help students. Use gestures when you're talking. You can create common gestures that teachers and students all use together, and they know what those mean. Another idea is to keep word walls around your room that correspond with images. So they have those words up there in a matching picture. And if your class has a hard time understanding a new word, think about other ways that you can get them to understand that word, or get them to understand that word without resorting to English. So you can draw on the board, you can act it out, you can describe it. So use all those tools that you have in your toolbox. Cognates are a powerful tool, but we need to teach students how to use them. Start off the year by brainstorming some cognates with your students, and then be sure to write and pronounce them so that students can see how the sounds match the spelling. The sooner that students have that cognate skill in their toolbox, the more comfortable they will feel tackling new language. And I always tell my students, remember, cognates are words you recognize. Rephrasing language is not only a valuable aid for teachers, students can also learn how to circumlocute. Teach students some common phrases at the beginning of the year, like it's a thing, it's an action, it looks like, it feels like, it smells like, to get them started and help them describe the word that they need. And that can be part of your word wall too, putting some of those commonly used circumlocution phrases up for them to access when they need them. Slowing down and repetition go hand in hand. Remember what it felt like when you were learning your language. You were grateful if people spoke slowly in short phrases and repeated themselves frequently. Be that friendly language source for your students. Questioning techniques like circling are great opportunities to provide input for students. Using these techniques allows for varied repetitions of those words and phrases, but in context. And remember to factor in space. Give students time to think, allow them to process silently what they've heard or read, and give them space to respond. Learning language is not a race. So let's take a moment and look over these strategies. And this is another thing we can share in the chat. Which of these strategies do you currently use or have you been using? And which of these strategies are a goal for you? So I know for me, even now, pausing and allowing for that space is something that I need to remember. So let us know in the chat, which do you currently use or which are you going to try? Try to ask more questions. Yes, and circling, when we talk about circling, that is a tiered question strategy. So starting off asking yes, no questions, then either or questions, then some questions with interrogatives. So if you want more information, you can Google circling questioning techniques, and you will find a lot of great resources out there. Yeah, so some responses using lots of visuals and questioning, using gestures for common words like have, need, want. That's great. Using cognates and writing them out to share in September. Yes, use cognates to show the similarities. Students really like to see that similarities, and then they'll start recognizing them and bringing them into class. And it's also a good opportunity to talk about false cognates too. PQR. Ooh, yeah, creating a list of common words that you want to see your students use more. That's a great suggestion. And having phrases on your wall. Yes, never underestimate the power of having all those words available for students to see all the time. Again, they might only be seeing that target language in your classroom. So putting as much of it out there as you can. Definitely having a word wall this year. It's great. Well, thanks for all the responses. Keep them coming. So when we talk about teaching in the target language, let's see what this can look like in action. So how can we provide some input that's comprehensible for students? Here I have some spreads from Interculturas from our Spanish textbook. Imagine that you are presenting this vocabulary related to food to students. So you have this information here in these textbook spreads. What kinds of strategies would you use? Maybe some of the ones we just talked about, or in what ways would you use this vocabulary to interact with your students? So here we've got some images of food, and then we've got descriptions below. And then over here, we have some in a slightly different context. So let us know in the chat, what are some things that you might do to present this vocabulary to your students? Yes, perfect. So look for some cognates. And this is a great one to start off with students too, like hamburguesa. That's going to be a great cognate for them to recognize. Sopa, that can be a tough one. How many of your students have asked about eating soap versus soup with sopa? That's a great one to talk about. So cognates, lots of cognates in there. Show pictures. Yes, that's one of the things I would do too. Show these images as you're talking about the vocabulary, point to what you're talking about, show them. Express preferences. Yeah. And you can start to bring in those question words too, like which do you prefer? What do you like more? Get those interrogatives in there. Oh, the gestures, expressing likes and dislikes with thumbs up, thumbs down. That's a great way to pair those words, those preference words, with a gesture. Oh, and then bringing in, you can extend that beyond just preference and ask, what time do you eat with your family? These are great suggestions. Ooh, a 4 corners. So you've got I like, I don't like, I love, I don't like it all in different corners of your room, and have students move based on the food that you're talking about. Oh, so that was an interesting suggestion. Don't show the words, just show the pictures and start talking about them first. Yeah, these are great. So we covered a lot of those strategies that we just saw before in this spread right here. So those are some great ways that you can start off using that vocabulary with your students. In Entre Culturas and Entre Culture, our Spanish and French series, You can find suggestions for incorporating these types of strategies that we just saw in the appendices of the teacher edition. So if you open your teacher edition textbook and go to the appendices in the back, there's a section there called instructional strategies. So this is an example right here from Entre Culturas Unidad 6, where students will interact with the authentic resource. And these strategies provide suggestions and prompts to help you maintain that target language use, but also so it's comprehensible for your students. And again, if you're trying something out for the first time, maybe you've never done any type of circling before, I encourage you to script out what you might say until you feel confident to spontaneously come up with those questions on your own. I used to create a cheat sheet for myself, and I would post it in the back wall of my classroom, and it would be big words and I could see it from the front of my room, and maybe students might look at it, but it didn't really mean anything to them. It was something that was really important for me, and it helped me run my class every day. So think about what can help you as you're teaching to do some of those strategies and post them on the wall. You know, you can have your own word wall for yourself too. Remember that that journey to 90% plus target language is just that. It's a journey. And as you think about where you are in that quest towards that 90% and how you can continue your journey, keep in mind that your classroom and the materials that you use need to be sources that provide input and provide students opportunities to interact with it. Now we're going to switch gears and look at some ways that we feature interculturality in every class period. So our next trivia question, what are the 3 Ps when we're talking about culture? So again, you can put your answers in the chat. You can hold them up. We've got A, B, or C. 3 Ps relating to culture. So far, everybody has 100% on our trivia today. It is a products, practices, and perspectives. So in this day and age, teaching culture has moved well beyond fun facts and Fiesta Fridays. The definitional culture that most teachers are familiar with now are the 3 Ps, those products, practices, and perspectives. However, over the years, we've taken those 3 Ps a step further to look at how we demonstrate knowledge of those 3 Ps through how we communicate with others. And we must also look inward towards our own culture and reflect on that. Language teaching has a responsibility to prepare learners for interaction with people from other cultural backgrounds, teaching them skills and attitudes as well as knowledge in order to be able to communicate in culturally appropriate ways. As a result, interculturality must be woven throughout every aspect of our teaching, from resources to tasks to assessments. In your classrooms, take a moment, consider how you incorporate opportunities for intercultural growth. From the very beginning of a unit, we can use the unit theme to draw connections and comparisons between students' lives and the French or Spanish-speaking worlds. Once you've identified the target culture of focus for your unit, you can use a timeline like this one that you see here, or a spread of pictures like this one from Entre Culturas 1 to introduce students to that target culture. So Entre Culturas and Interculturality, both textbook series, start the unit with a cultural spread that has a lot of images from that target culture. So you'll notice that these spreads are loaded with highly engaging photos and images, and also a lot of cognates. So that will help you maintain that high level of target language use that we were just talking about. You can start these discussions by using an activity like Picture Talk. Picture Talk is an activity where you talk a lot about one picture and provide a lot of comprehensible input for students. So these images that you see here are from Spanish Level 1, Unit 5. So the students are approaching a novice high level. So make sure that you're describing and asking questions at the appropriate proficiency level for your students. You could talk about the buildings that you're seeing here, the city layout that students are seeing, the products that are pictured from the 2 different places, or the bodies of water in each one. Those are some places you could start. Another activity is called I See, I Think, I Wonder. And in this one, you choose a photo and talk about what students see in that picture. So for example, this one up here on the top left, ask students what they see. So for example, and no opinions, they're not giving opinions, they're just making observations. So they might say they see a man cutting fruit, they might see a man with a red hat, a beach, the ocean, etc. Then you ask them what they think. So some connections are being made here. They might say that he is working, or they think that he sells fruit. And then that last step is for them to say what they wonder about what they're seeing. So they might ask questions like, I wonder if he makes a lot of money. I wonder how many hours he works. I wonder if it's hot on that beach. So they have a lot of opportunities to dive deeper into their thoughts when they're observing these images. By inviting our students to analyze what they're seeing, they start to think about that cultural information as well, and it sparks that connections and comparisons that they'll be making later on throughout the unit. Keep in mind that even when focusing on growing interculturality, we want to maintain a high level of target language use. Jackie Van Houten, who was most notably known for serving as the ACWIL president in 2015, has shared a framework for helping your students engage in and reflect on cultural concepts to increase in their intercultural competence. The framework takes into consideration that deep reflection normally occurs in one's native language. For this reason, the reflective activities are designed with a maximum use of the target language during instructional time and an option for use of English at home for deeper reflection. The framework for reflective activities includes introducing the topics in the target language, being sure to encourage reflection in English outside of the classroom, and then following up with activities in the target language when you're back together in class. And just a note, deeper reflection can occur in the target language if the student is at a higher proficiency level. So let's see what that framework looks like in action. This is an example from the French text Interculturality. So here we see a Culture section. And although the content is presented in English, as the teacher, you can present the material and provide a high-level summary to students in French. Here's a great place to rely on these images right here to facilitate a discussion. Then students can complete the réflexion interculturelle down here at the bottom. They can complete that section at home and engage in a deeper reflection in English. Then in your next class together, you can follow up with a discussion or activity in the target language. Cultural reflection activities like these provide space for students to better know themselves and their own cultures, explore communities, and explore the world around them, which are all critical steps in developing intercultural competence. You can also ask students to demonstrate interculturality by asking them to use their language skills and cultural understanding to interact in new cultural contexts. One such way to do this is to design communicative tasks around an authentic resource, like the example from this summative assessment. Students will interact with videos about 2 different schools in Costa Rica and use what they learn about the schools to begin a sister school program with one of them. The tasks in the assessment require learners to demonstrate not only language skills, but also their understanding of the schools in Costa Rica. So this example actually brings me to my next trivia question about authentic resources. So here is our next question. An authentic resource is one that has been created blank a native speaker, blank a native speaker. So you've got 2 options on there. You've got A or B. Everybody's doing so well in trivia today. Yes, our answer is A. An authentic resource is one that's been created for a native speaker by a native speaker. Very well done, everyone. So as we saw earlier, authentic resources are that source of input created by a native speaker for a native speaker. This can include video, audio clips, articles, infographics, advertisements, social media posts, even memes. So why is it important to expose our students to authentic resources? Because these resources provide context-rich language that comes from sources that students could encounter while using the target language outside of the classroom. And authentic resources naturally have cultural products, practices, and perspectives embedded into them. There are so many resources out there. How do you know how to choose? First of all, when possible, the resources need to be authentic, which means that it was never meant to be used in your classroom. It was created for a real purpose for speakers of that language. Next, the resource should be appealing to your students. It should connect to their real life, grab their attention, and interest them. It should be accessible, which means that it's appropriate for the student's age and proficiency level, and provide a lot of visual support, cognates, known words, and links to prior knowledge. Finally, it should be aligned with the goals of your unit or lesson. It should match the learning targets, act as a springboard for interpersonal and presentational tasks, and be an example of language and culture in context. One quick and easy way that I like to use authentic resources was to start class every day with a meme of the day in Spanish. And I found these by going to Pinterest, and every once in a while I'd go on Pinterest, find a whole bunch of memes in Spanish, put them in a folder. And by the end of the year, I had over 500 memes that I could just pull out every day and put up on the board to start class off. So here's my next question for you, next discussion question. Where do you find your authentic resources? So I just said Pinterest, I found a lot of memes. Where do you find your authentic resources? Oh, TV5, Grand for long, yes. Radio Français. Radio France International. Interesting. I think we have a lot of French teachers today. That's awesome. Pinterest, yes. YouTube, Google, movies. Oh, some magazines, yes. Google infographics. Songs, yes, of course. Lots of great suggestions. Yes, lots of places to find authentic resources. Thank you so much for sharing. Oops. So it is possible to find great authentic resources in all of these places that we just listed. But I will say that if you use Interculturality and Interculturality, you can find authentic resources like these ones you see on the screen embedded into every single unit. And remember that authentic resources can be incorporated anywhere in your unit or class period where students will be engaged and able to interact with the materials. So they could be used as hooks for lessons. They could be used as discussion pieces for communicative tasks. You can use authentic resources to make those cultural comparisons or connections, or to investigate a structure that you've been studying or a series of focused vocabulary words, or they can even be used for assessment. Like in this example, we have an assessment for a French unit. And for the interpretive task, students are going to watch a video about the importance of sleep. And from there, students complete a presentational and interpersonal task based on the information that they see in the video. So I'm going to play a really quick clip of this video for this assessment.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous, vous venez peut-être tout juste de vous réveiller et c'est bien. Le sommeil est un élément clé de notre équilibre. Et pourtant, une grande partie de la population ne dort pas suffisamment. On estime que la durée de sommeil nécessaire à un adulte se situe entre 7 et 8 heures et une seule semaine avec moins de 6 heures de sommeil par nuit affecte plus de 700 de nos jeunes. Quelles sont alors les conséquences sur notre santé? Eh bien, une seule nuit de moins de 6 heures provoque une diminution de la concentration, de la mémoire et de l'immunité. Elle engendre également une augmentation de l'appétit, une accélération du vieillissement de la peau ou encore une perte de masse cérébrale.
So when I go back to those requirements for a good authentic resource, is this one accessible? I would say yes, because there's lots of cognates and images to help students understand. Is it appealing? It's a topic that students probably care a lot about. Students need to sleep and they like to talk about how much sleep they need. So it's definitely appealing for them. And then is it aligned? This particular unit talks about health. And so in this case, this video would be aligned to my unit goals. So that's just one example of how you can use an authentic resource in your assessment. It's also important to consider the tasks associated with authentic resources when you're incorporating them into class. When students interact with the authentic resource, they need to do so in a manner that's appropriate for their proficiency level. One great reminder for us always is to modify the task that we ask students to do, not the text that they're using to do it. So what does that mean when we say that students should interact at the appropriate proficiency level? These descriptors are a great reminder of what we can expect from students at each level. From here, we should always remind students and ourselves actually that it's okay not to always understand everything 100% of the time. And unless students are at an advanced level, they will most likely not be many times that they don't understand everything. So my hope for my Spanish 1 students is that they reach at least the novice mid-level of proficiency. So when I read here that description, I see that they're able to understand highly contextualized words and phrases, cognates, and borrowed words. And that helps me as a teacher decide the types of authentic resources and how students are going to interact with it. When using authentic resources, don't be afraid to go beyond just asking and answering comprehension questions. Ask your students to do a communicative task with the information that they've gotten from that resource. For example, if students have interpreted this infographic about getting a good night's sleep, perhaps they create and conduct a survey where they interview their classmates about their sleep habits and write a brief presentational report summarizing their findings. Or students could design a social media campaign that stresses the importance of getting good sleep. The possibilities are endless here. So what about authentic resources? Do you incorporate these regularly into your classroom? And regardless if you're already using them or if you're newer to them, what's a strategy that you could try when you're choosing an authentic resource? So how often are you bringing in authentic resources? How often are you going out and looking for those types of things? So let us know. Yeah, what do you have students do with those authentic resources too? Yes, I agree. Trying to use authentic resources as much as you can. Practice, reflection, conversation. Gather data. That's a great skill. Make observations, comparisons, surveys. Ooh, plane tickets. Everyone has a different plane ticket, and upon the prompt, they record the answer. Interesting. Oh, use Canva to design their own infographics. Think, pair, share. Wow, one every class. That is a awesome goal. Ooh, thinking, use routines. Yes, asking students to make those comparisons and contrast with themselves with those authentic resources. These are great suggestions. Thank you, everyone, for those ideas on using authentic resources. All right, we are going to switch gears again. And now we're going to talk about how you actively engage students in learning grammar structure. So our next trivia question: is traditional grammar teaching considered a deductive or inductive approach? So traditional, think legacy practices, deductive or inductive? Ooh, this is going to be the tricky one today, I think. Our answer is deductive, our legacy practices. So, as our question just stated, the traditional approach that many teachers have used for years to teach grammar is a deductive approach. However, research has shown, and ACTFL agrees, that the inductive method of teaching grammar will lead to a greater understanding of it, which in turn leads to increased communication, which is really our goal for students. So think those worksheets and activities that we've done where we have students use isolated grammar to practice. They don't really help students to internalize that concept. Grammar needs to be taught in context so that students can attach meaning to what they're learning and see how it's actually used. Being able to understand and communicate is motivating for our students. So when they're motivated, they'll ultimately learn better. And while this can be a significant shift away from our legacy practices, it does pay off in the end. I remember a moment in my teaching when a student was trying to tell the class what he had done the day before. And he looked at me and said, "Yo voy." So I go, "Yo voy ayer." So he was asking me, I go, "Yesterday?" And I just looked at him. I said, "Fui," like I went. And that was what he was looking for. And so the entire class in that moment learned that word. And because it was in a context and students were engaged, they got that one. And it gives them a reason to retain that structure. So let's look at a model that Interculturas and Interculturality use to teach grammar inductively. So in a traditional deductive grammar approach in our legacy practices, you would give students all of the rules up front and then ask them to memorize and repeat. However, with our inductive approach, as the teacher, you are serving as a guide for students as they take on a more active role in exploring, observing, and discovering that structure on their own. One way to format an inductive grammar lesson is through the discovery process, which is what we use in our series, or both our French and Spanish series. So the first step in this process, in this discovery process, is for students to decipher a text for meaning only. At this point, we're not talking about grammar and we're not mentioning infinitives or conjugations or anything like that. We are providing students with an interpretive task for a text that incorporates that target structure. So this could be lyrics to a song, a series of memes, a comic strip, an authentic resource in some way, or maybe an excerpt from a novel that you're reading together as a class. In this case, we have this diary entry here using our structure that we're looking for. So during this first step, again, I'm not focusing on the target structure, but rather on ensuring that students understand the gist of what they're reading. Then the next step is to draw students' attention to that target structure. Ask them to look for anything that makes these words different from the ones around them, or maybe they notice a pattern going on here. The third step is to have students take their observations a step further by making predictions about what they think the structure is communicating and how it's formed. So if you use Interculturas and Interculturality, there are some questions already provided for you to help them in this step. Another key part of this step is providing the opportunities for students to discuss their findings with other classmates and to negotiate meaning. At the end of this step, your class will have come up with their own hypothesis as to what that structure means and how it's formed. Then it's time for your class to test their predictions. You are going to do this by providing additional input for students using that same structure. And so this could be a video, another authentic resource, a different song, or you could create some kind of input yourself. Ask your students to consider if their hypothesis still holds true in this new context. And if it doesn't, then provide students with more input to help clarify the confusion about the new structure. Usually by the end of this step, students have a really good idea of what's going on. Finally, students are going to interact with the structure in communicative activities in each of the different modes of communication. In Interculturality and Interculturality, a variety of tasks will be available to practice that structure. Now, think about how you present grammar to students. If you teach grammar deductively, is there one structure that you could teach one structure that you already teach that you could try out as an inductive lesson? And if you're new to inductive grammar, what are some resources that you already incorporate into your classes that you could use as a foundation for an inductive grammar lesson? So remember, the transition to proficiency-based teaching doesn't happen overnight. It's a process and it takes small steps. And so trying to figure out one grammar lesson inductively, try it out and reflect on how it goes. That could be one step in your journey towards proficiency-based teaching. The last topic today relates to opportunities for students' growth and reflection. How do you motivate students in your classroom? Can-do statements are one way to help motivate learners because they tie into learning goals. They help students really focus on what they need to do with the content they acquire. Can-do statements provide clear expectations, which can increase student motivation and in turn, their proficiency, because when students know what is expected, they are more motivated to work towards that goal. And it's not just about having can-do statements, though. It's about how you use them. Conversations need to happen to help students connect with what they're learning and what they can do with that knowledge and how well they can do it. They are powerful tools when used for student self-assessment and reflection. Students can take ownership in their own learning. Can-do statements can also help them in setting goals and creating a plan to reach those goals. It needs to be an interactive process between you and your students. And if you're new to can-do statements, I highly recommend checking out the necessful, actful can-do statements. The performance indicators outline in those documents can serve as a great starting point to incorporating can-do statements into your own curriculum. And one way to incorporate can-do statements is by providing students opportunities to use them to self-assess and measure progress. Students can reflect upon their progress towards those can-do statements with a quick check-in. So you see here, these are spreads from our text. There's these little bars here. We've got 1, 2, or 3. This is a really quick way for students to reflect on how they feel about those can-do statements. So you could even just do an informal poll in class where students are holding up either 1, 2, or 3, how they feel about it. So 1 would be, I'm not ready yet, I need more practice. 2 would be, I feel like I can do this with some support. And 3 would be, I can do this on my own. So that could even be just a quick check-in towards the end of class with your can-do statements for that day or for that unit. For a more in-depth reflection, students can use those can-do statements in a portfolio to keep track of their progress by reflecting and attaching evidence of their progress. So if you have can-do statements that are laid out for your unit already, maybe ahead of time, giving those to students so that they can check in periodically throughout that unit. And then if they do an activity or some type of task that's related to that can-do statement, they can even go back and think about that work or attach that work to that particular can-do statement. Can-do statements can also help you as a teacher and serve as a foundation for evaluation tools like rubrics. So here we have an example of a single point rubric. This is actually from our French series. And this single point rubric incorporates can-do statements. Here, it's clear to teachers and students what the goal is, and it's written in student-friendly language. So here, this single point rubric allows you to not only reflect on that can-do statement, but also add in areas where the student was strong in that can-do statement and areas that still need work in a way that's clear to students and in a language they understand. Wow, we covered a lot of proficiency-based topics today during our journey. And as we wrap up today, I would like you to consider each of the topics that we addressed. We talked about target language use, interculturality, incorporating authentic resources, teaching grammar in context, and using can-do statements with our students. So take a moment and reflect. Which one of these practices do you plan to implement in the fall? And if you already implement all of these regularly, which one of these practices is still an area of growth for you? So let us know in the chat, which of these have you already been doing? Which ones do you want to try next year? What are you looking forward to? I'm seeing can-do statements. I'm seeing target language. Some people have multiple goals. Target language is a big one. Yes, using can-do statements and talk about them. Yes, talking about can-do statements more often. That was a goal for me too. How can I incorporate these more often? Target language. All right, we've got some great goals here to start using with our students fresh next year. Well, hopefully after our time together today, you've picked up a few proficiency-based techniques that can be useful in your coming school year. On behalf of our entire professional learning team at Wayside Publishing, I want to thank you so much for attending today and spending your valuable summer time with us. Also available for you, we do have a PD certificate available for attending this webinar. So Kristen is going to put the link in the chat. You should be able to just fill out the information at that link and it will generate a PD certificate for you. So again, thank you so much for being here. I want to remind you that if you go to our professional development page, recordings for this session and part 1 will be available soon. And in addition, any future PD opportunities, I know we have things coming up in August, so those future PD opportunities will be available up there once we get those posted. So thank you everyone so much. Enjoy your summer and good luck in this coming school year.